I actually had a really cool teacher in middle school that would bring in copies of the Comic Buyer's Guide for students to read and check out, like, because he also had like we had like a study hall or something sometimes or whatever, and he was a comic fan, and this is when I lived in Verona, Wisconsin, and he would bring them in so we could read them.
Wait. What was his name?
What was his name?
It will come to you in about 20 minutes, and then you can break in.
Yeah. No, I can totally see his face. I have such a hard time remembering his name. He was, he had a mustache, had glasses, he was a super nice guy, and very open and honest about a lot of things, which obviously teachers are not really allowed to be these days, no matter which political persuasion you're on.
No.
But
ignorance is strength.
Yes, that's what they tell us. So I actually, me personally, like, I actually have really fond memories of the Comic Buyer's Guide, and just the fact, and like all of my friends and stuff that were coming up in the 80s, and were like, it was part of everything that was going on with the whole comic culture.
Well, Maggie Thompson is one of the driving forces of modern fandom, both science fiction and comic books. She's probably among the very first person to organize comic book fandom, with her husband, the late Don Thompson, who was a great guy. I knew Don. They started publishing The Harbinger in 1960. Then they started publishing comic art. And Maggie's perhaps best known as the longtime editor of the Comics Buyer's Guide, which located in central Wisconsin. I always subscribed to it. Many people I know subscribe to it. And unfortunately, the internet has killed the Comics Buyer's Guide. But Maggie is still a vital part of comic fandom. And she's out there and accessible at a lot of cons, especially those in the upper Midwest. She's a winner of the Bob Clampett Award, Humanitarian Award, Eisner, Inkpot, Jack Kirby, and Harvey. Maggie has been a powerful force in promoting comic books, not only as entertainment, but as reading materials for children, because we all know now that comics help kids learn to read, as opposed to the old fact that they didn't help kids learn to read. So Maggie is busier than ever. Would that be correct?
As busy.
As busy.
I was going to say, I don't know.
I can sleep in now, which I used to have to get up at, go to work because there was a publishing company. Whereas now I can more make my own hours. I do a weekly newsletter contribution for Gemstone's Scoop newsletter. And then I do a sometimes monthly blog post for about 1,000 words and some pictures for Comic-Con San Diego, Comic-Con International San Diego, which is the San Diego Comic-Con. And I just contributed some stuff to their memory book for this year. So it's as asked. I do interviews as asked. And here we go. And by the way, here is Harbinger number 1.
Oh, nice.
Here we go.
There it is, folks.
There it is. And
it's worth a fortune.
This was, it's not in mint condition. Look. I'm just saying it's all frayed and stuff. I'm just saying. In 1960, we went to the World Science Fiction Convention, and Dick and Pat Lupoff came as Captain and Mary Marvel of the Fawcett comic book. And we were sitting there at the banquet the next night, and Don and I were sitting there with Bill Thailing and Hal Lynch and some other science fiction fans. We go, look, we understand science fiction fandom. We've been here for years. We know who writes the stuff. We know who draws the stuff. We know who edits the stuff. We know how to communicate about the stuff. What's with comic books? Does Walt Disney write and draw his Walt Disney's comics and stories? I don't think so. Who does? And so we published Harbinger, which says it's more than just a one-shot. It is a sighting shot, published in hopes of reaching as many potential supporters of and contributors to comic art as possible. And then this was our first issue. So I don't know if you know the comic strip characters, and I'm still having trouble with the thing here, but anyway, this is Don and me. And down below, I don't know if you know who those characters are.
I have seen them many times. I know who they are in my mind, but I can't summon that for it. Yeah, those are some legacy characters. Tell us, Maggie.
They are Barnaby and Mr. O'Malley from the Barnaby comic strip by Crockett Johnson, who is probably known to the wider world as illustrator of things like A Hole is to Dig and various children's books. But basically the concept was there's a little boy whose mom reads him a fairy story that begins about a fairy godmother. And he goes to bed and he looks out the window and he says, oh, a fairy godmother. I wish I had a fairy godmother. And the star grows bright and through the window flies Mr. O'Malley, who says, lucky boy, your wish is granted. I'm your fairy godfather. And he is indeed the fairy godfather, who is very ineffective and whom coincidentally, no adult can ever see. So they all think that Mr. O'Malley is an imaginary character, which he isn't. Blah, blah, blah. Fantastic strip. Fantagraphics has brought out, I think, at least 4 volumes of strip reprints. And that's one of the challenges that we have now, is to make the classics available to modern readers, because they're still great. Yeah. Every once in a while, something, not Barnaby, but some of them have offensive material, and we have to figure out how to deal with it. We had a mimeograph. We knew how to do fanzines. My mom was a science fiction writer you never heard of. So my first Worldcon was 1955 in Cleveland, and I was 12. Wow. And so I grew up in that world, again, as I say, of understanding that people wrote it and drew it and got together to meet every now and then and talk about what they did. So that Worldcon, that was, I don't know, I met Anthony Boucher. Forey Ackerman was in a gag humor. It was a really funny play that I wish survived in the manuscript. It was a science fiction carol, and it was about the would-be writer who wanted to become a professional science fiction writer. And it was Scroogewitz was one of the, et cetera. Yeah, Scroogewitz wanted to be a science fiction writer, and he wanted to contribute to the magazine. So we had Boucher playing a science fiction editor. We had Scroogewitz with the thing, and he turns in this story, and the guy goes, no. Oh, the end. That's fantastic. I will pay you. Oh, absolutely. We will publish the end. That's grand. That's 2 words. I'll pay you 5 cents a word. That's, oh my gosh, that's more money than you can imagine. And he doles out the pennies and he goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And Forey Ackerman wanders through with his hand out, and he puts the 10th. And he says, that's the agent's fee.
Have you met Robert Heinlein?
He was one of my mom's best friends. Yes, I have met him. When he won the Hugo for Starship Troopers, Bob had told Mom that he wasn't going to be able to make it to the award, and would she please pick it up for him? So she stood up in front waiting for, if he won it, would she pick it up? And she stood up and she said, oh, Bob would be so happy to be here. And he, being the master of manipulation, then strode into the banquet, or into the award hall, got a standing ovation, of course, etc. So later that evening, my parents had a party we had a 2-room suite at the Con Hotel, and Mom and Dad were talking with Judy Merrill and Fritz and Jonko Leiber. And Judy was sitting there on the bed and looking increasingly bored. And she said, this is the most boring party I've ever been to. Would it be okay if I brought some friends? And Mom and Dad said, sure, what the heck? And about 5 minutes later, down the hall, it was probably 10 minutes later, down the hall comes Isaac Asimov holding Heinlein's Hugo, singing Hail the Conquering Hero Comes, and thus did the party begin. So, yeah. Yep. They knew each other.
that was the long version.
I don't know why they race motorcycles up and down my street.
Well, it's to give you background sounds. Yeah. Otherwise it would just seem, et cetera. My son works for National Public Radio. He actually has a closet that he's got things hanging in to give him the sound buffer.
Yeah.
Whereas you have signs behind you which reflect the sound.
Yeah, I'd like to go out there with a wiffle bat, but
People are allowed to have
I
motorcycles.
ride a bike myself, but my bikes have mufflers.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that doesn't show how powerful you are.
Yeah, that doesn't. It takes away from your coolness, Mike.
Maggie, what was the first comic convention?
I've forgotten the gentleman's name. It was a one day, like an afternoon thing. The first big multi-day event was in, and she now checks her notes because this is the sort of thing that I knew would come up. Just saying. Was John Benson ran it. Here we go. July 23rd and 24th, 1966. It was John Benson's convention. Chris Steinbrenner ran the movie projector, and we watched the Flash Gordon serial. And then there were events like Don debated Dark and and again, I screwed up his Darvin, Leonard Darvin, the head of the Comics Code Administration. And debated that, and people in the audience included people like Ted White, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There were 4 females, four, just saying. Pat Lupoff, Lee Hoffman, who was a major award-winning Western writer, especially, Flo Steinberg, and me. Those were the females who attended that particular convention. And most of the attendees came up to my shoulder. So if you imagine being in school and your teacher did whatever, these kids were buying and trading and just gone to heaven. So it was great. Wow. It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman was supposed to be running on Broadway. And so the Lupoffs, with whom we were staying, bless their hearts, best hosts in the world, had tried to arrange tickets, but the show closed. So as a substitute, we went off Broadway and saw the Mad Show. So I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it was pre-laugh-in characters. And excuse me, I will mute.
Were they trying to reach you about your vehicle's extended warranty?
It could be. It almost certainly is. Yes. Okay. So also at that convention, Pat and Dick Lupoff handed out their issue of Zero, the first issue of Zero, spelled Xero, as we know. Somewhere here, I have my reference book. Yep. Here we go. Yeah. Here we go.
Very cool.
Is that currently in print?
I don't think so. I always recommend Bookfinder to people.
Bookfinder,
BOOKFINDER.com. And you just check that, and then you just hunt, and then you see what's out there. And I've had really good luck with it.
Got it.
At that time, did you have any idea of like what was going on like over in France or Italy or Japan or anything like that with any of their comic kind of stuff?
Yes. Science fiction again. Science fiction.
Yeah.
Alan Dodd was a British fan. And at one point, he sent us a package of, I think it was Fluke. And he said, "Congratulations, you are now the owners of the largest collection of the Fluke comic strip in the world." Because he had been clipping it. I assume it was he. Yeah. And it's a fantastic strip if you've never seen it. Again, little boy, imaginary companion, etc. Right. And it started as a strip called Rufus and then turned into Fluke. Fluke, as I say, was this strange little critter. And then 4D Jones by Maddox. That was a cowboy who could jump through a hoop that would take him through the fourth dimension into another thing, etc. Years later, when we were doing the golden age of, is that what it was? Anyway, one of the magazines for New Media, we did, Fantasy Empire. Hal Schuster wanted me to do a fanzine about Doctor Who, or a magazine about Doctor Who. Right. And he wanted to call it Doctor Who. And I said, if you do that, the BBC will break your legs. Yeah, but if we call it Fantasy Empire and deal with fantasy and science fiction in the British Empire, I can fill it, and guess who will be on the cover every issue? So that is what we did. But one of the things we did was we got permission and ran excerpts. So we ran an excerpt of 4D Jones and an excerpt of Fluke. And there was also, Forey Ackerman had asked Mom and Dad did they have any duplicates of Pogo comics, because he had a friend in the Fantasy Amateur Press Association who lived in France. He was a big Walt Kelly fan. Did they have any duplicates they could send? And Mom said, well, we have some beat up comics, but so we sent some to Jean, and and so there was a long correspondence. He wanted to translate Pogo into French, if you can imagine.
Wow.
So I actually have a French paperback reprint of Pogo. Another British strip, which was actually a translated strip, was Moomin by Toa Janssen. And he was a fan of that and sent us a photo of Toa Janssen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yes is the answer. Cool. We were aware, and we knew about Hokusai because my great-grandfather had been a missionary to Japan and came back with some of the block print material. So understanding line art and how it conveyed emotion and so forth was another constituent of my fetchings up. I'm lucky. There was a small convention I attended a few years ago, and I was sitting behind the table with one of the dealers, and I said, well, I grew up surrounded by books. And she kind of teared up and she said, oh, I wish I'd had that. And didn't everybody? Why? No, everybody didn't. Yeah. I'm lucky.
Yeah.
So.
And you were able to incorporate it into what you were doing, which is one of the things that I loved about your stuff, is because it was very much from a fan point of view and kind of appreciation, and very intelligent, but not snobby. I mean,
I try not to be snobby.
Yeah.
I can't be snobby.
I mean, I thought it was, that's what I loved about it.
Well, everybody gets started in a different way. So I was lucky enough to have rheumatic fever when I was 5, and I was bedridden for 5 months. And that's when Mom taught me to read with, come on,
comic books.
Thank you.
Science fiction novels.
No, not yet. Not yet. I grew up able to read them later. So that was another thing I was going to wave, actually. This is the cover. Well, let's see if we can do this.
There you go.
Coordinating. Here we go. And down at the... here we go. Betsy Curtis. Okay. That was her first sale. She said, should I use a pseudonym? Should I, have a man's name? And Anthony Boucher said, I want women to know that they can not only read science fiction and fantasy, they can write it. And put her name on the cover with her first story. Nobody had ever heard of her.
Yeah. So, did you know Ursula Le Guin?
No, she's fantastic, but no. Lee Brackett, absolutely. Ed and Lee were buddies of Mom and Dad's. And in fact, Mom was taking us to a picnic that she thought was at the home of Ed and Lee in Kinsman, Ohio. And we got there and there was no party, no picnic. What the heck? And Mom went across the street, and I think it was Ed's mom and dad had a farm across the street. And they said, oh no, they're at a party in Beaver Falls at the home of Basil Wells. So Mom said, okay. And we got in the car and drove there. And Wells, who was a science fiction writer, was holding this picnic. And at the picnic, it included P. Schuyler Miller, Andre Norton, Ed Hamilton, Lee Brackett, those folks. And they had sent out a note to the National Fantasy Fan Federation that any fan who wanted to attend this picnic could. Don was a member of the National Fantasy Fan Federation, and he came and he hitchhiked there from his home in Titusville area. And then when he was hitching the way back, he said, are you going my way? And we were, and that's how Don and I met. So lucky. Can I say lucky?
Wow.
This is not because I planned anything. This is me being lucky.
Yeah.
And so you never look down on somebody who isn't lucky.
Right.
You realize how damn lucky you are.
Wasn't Lee Brackett a screenwriter as well?
Oh, yeah. Major.
Did she have some Raymond Chandler?
She did Beat the Devil. She co-wrote it with William Faulkner, the script. Wow. And at one point she said, what was it, that Bogart came? He said, did you write, he had a line, he said, did you write this? And she said, no, I think that was not Bill. And she's, Bogey said, no. He said, I didn't think you had. You're much better. Yeah, I mean, yeah, so there's that. And she also wrote Rio Bravo for John Wayne. And then when they were doing Rio Lobo, she said they sat down for the story conference. And she said, look, I don't want to do the thing where he gets off the stagecoach, whatever the scene was. And Wayne said, well, why not? It worked perfectly well the first time. So she said, okay. So that was, yes, major screenwriter. Yes. And science fiction writer, etc. So yeah. My self-descriptor, because remember I was doing that self-descriptor thing that I said I was going to plug in here somewhere, is now when people say, oh, you're at this convention, describe yourself. And
Right.
It was, and I say, I also have to check because it's multisyllabic, celebrity adjacent award-winning pop culture nerd. Because I will drop the names. You just sit there and I will drop names at you. 1976 San Diego Con. And we were the fan guests of honor, got to take our kids. I have a photo of Mel Blanc talking to my daughter. And by the way, he said to her, which I assume was the thing he said to every kid, what voice do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? And she said, I want you to do Jack Benny's Maxwell. You don't even know what the hell I'm talking about.
Well, I know Jack Benny. My grandfather used to call me Jack Benny.
Well, there we go. On the Jack Benny radio show, when they would do an episode where they would start the car, that was Mel Blanc going, etc. Right? And so no one had ever asked him to do that, much less a little, 9-year-old girl. And so his response was, stand back, kid, you're going to get wet.
Yeah.
And he did. So that was an incredible convention, obviously. Marvel was doing because they were doing the comic book adaptation, they were publicizing the movie that was going to be released the following year, which was Star Wars. And so Charlie Lippincott, who was the promo guy for Star Wars, said, it was going to be new and different. Why? Because the spaceships were not going to be all shiny and new. They were going to be beat up. This was not something you usually saw in a science fiction movie.
Right.
And he said, well, and we said, who's in it, whatever. And he said, there's this guy, you probably never heard of him. His name is Mark Hamill. Well, we had there was a sitcom called Texas Wheelers, which we had watched initially because we were fans of Jack Elam, who plays the father of the family. It was great. It has never been on DVD. It needs to be on DVD. This is my plug for DVD for Texas Wheelers, I'm just saying.
Right.
And Mark Hamill played one of the two kids. Gary Busey played the other of the older kids.
Wow.
The script was wonderful. At one point, we hear a couple sort of trying to make out on the porch, and you just hear the girl's voice, and she says, no, don't do that. I'm not that kind of girl yet. Okay.
Yeah.
Scripting. Yes.
Yeah.
Scripting is all. It was fantastic scripts. And we said, we love Mark Hamill. That's so exciting that he's going to be in this movie. And he said, well, in a way, it's been a little bit of a problem. And we went, what's the problem? He said, well, he's a comics fan.
Yeah.
And he's filming in Europe. So he didn't want to miss any of the comics.
That's funny.
That were going to be coming out while he wasn't there to buy them. So part of the deal was they had to make sure that he didn't miss any copies of his comics. And so now when he comes to Comic-Con, I think people just think of him as, and he actually comes anonymously now, but at one point he would wear a fake name badge and work a dealer's table in exchange for Golden Age comics for his collection. I'm just saying, he's a fan. And, one of us is what I'm saying. One of us freaks.
Well, you had a pretty large collection.
Yeah. You can buy them. You buy them and you don't throw them away. In fact, visual aid number whatever. Frequently you ask at the start of the show, as I researched, is like, how did you start collecting? Yeah. Right? Okay. This is the actual copy. Wait a minute. Here we go. The actual copy of Animal Comics number, whatever the heck, 27, I think. Yeah. And it had Pogo in it.
Oh, nice.
Okay. So this is the actual copy I bought. And the way I know, we're going to do another close-up.
Uh-oh. Wrote her name on it?
No. My mother if you see this, it's Animal Comics
Yep.
27, the first copy. This is because they bought more than one copy at this point. I bought one,
Right.
and then they would buy more because Mom had to read me, because I couldn't read yet. Mom had to read me the comic book, and there was this Pogo story, this Albert and Pogo, and it was hilarious. And they wrote a fan letter, and then they picked up multiple copies from that point on, wrote a fan letter to Walt Kelly. Didn't get a response, but this is what you do when you're a fan. You know the editorial address and you know the guy you're writing to, right? So they wrote to Walt Kelly, care of, etc., the editorial offices. They passed it on to Kelly. Well, Animal Comics was in trouble. The circulation was plummeting. And I bought this when I was 4. And so they didn't get any response. But then 2 issues later, there's a panel in which Pogo says, hey, all our friends out there, we'd love to hear from you. If you want to get back to us, we'd just love to we love to read all your letters. So they did a follow-up letter. And that time he answered.
Oh.
And years later, and I am talking like last year, I was going back and forth with Mike Barrier, who was researching something else. And I sent him, August Derleth correspondence that's in the Wisconsin Historical Society. Okay. So he had correspondence with Walt Kelly too, because he wanted to reprint the Pogo strips, or the comic books, actually, the comic books. And I believe his animal comics are in bound volumes in the Wisconsin Historical Society at this point. Anyway.
In Madison?
In Madison, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm just saying. And the interesting thing is the superhero comics, because he was a publisher, he bound them. So they're bound volumes of comic books from the 1940s.
Nice.
So I had photographed the letters and I sent them to Mike Barrier. And I said, I had correspondence that Mom and Dad had written to Walt Kelly, but later on they kept all the correspondence because Mom and Dad kept carbons. So we have carbons of their letters to him and then his response. And I said, unfortunately, I don't have the first 2 letters they wrote. And he said, I've read them. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, they're in the Wisconsin Historical Society in the collection. So he kept them.
Wow.
And they're in the collection, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I'm sorry, not in Madison. Great, OSU, Columbus, Ohio. The Billy Ireland collection of comics stuff and whatever, and a bunch of Walt Kelly's papers were donated there. That's where those are, and I contacted them, and you can get them, and they'll have copy stamped all over them because they're technically copyright Walt Kelly.
Right.
And then the letters back, and so they protect the copyright by doing that. So Mom and Dad's letters to Kelly had copy stamped all over them when I saw them. And so then I contacted them and said, could I have clean scans? Because technically the copyright is mine. And they said, sure, send me clean scans. So I have those.
Great.
Wow.
Did you know Carl Barks?
Yes. 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 We got to visit him and Gary. And he was wonderful. And that was one of our triumphs, was the last issue of Comic Art that we did. We had uncovered his identity because he worked anonymously all his life. Well, not all his life, but while he was doing comics. And someone had let slip who he was, and we were able to contact him, and correspondence started. One of the visual aids I didn't bring to wave around was I discovered recently in a little envelope from Carl Barks, and it was a check for a subscription to Newfangles, which we never cashed, thereby screwing up his check. But because why would I cash a check from Carl Barks for Cry Eye? We did ask if we could commission a portrait of Uncle Scrooge for an over the fireplace type of portrait of Uncle Scrooge. Well, he wasn't licensed to do that. And he was very careful about his license. And so among the things, he'd send us little cartoons of himself, that sort of thing, but nothing ducks.
I tracked him down when I was 12, and he sent me an ink drawing of Uncle Scrooge.
You win. You totally win.
Yeah.
You totally win.
You want to see it?
Yes.
Hang on a second. I'll be right back.
Oh, brother.
They were wonderful hosts and hostesses.
Yeah.
She was an artist. She did landscapes. And at one point, Don and I were at a garage sale in Ohio, I think. And there was a...
Uh-oh.
He's going to show.
Yeah.
Oh, lovely. Oh, my goodness.
Probably my oldest possession.
Oh my gosh, I should think. Oh my gosh, That's wonderful. Oh, that's grand. Oh my gosh. Back in the middle of my anecdote. Oh, there was a like you'd buy at a furnishing store. They would have like posters laminated on, but pasted to like a oak frame type thing. And it was a landscape of like an old dead tree in a field kind of thing. And I picked it. I thought, I really like that. For some reason, I really liked it. I think we bought it for $5 and put it in the car. And Don goes, good spotting. Excellent. Excellent. I go, what are you talking about? He said, look at the signature. And it was by Gary Barks. Yes. So what he said.
And you were like, of course it was.
No. I said, oh my gosh. No. And isn't that an endorsement? I bought it because I liked it, not because of the signature.
Yep.
And I knew she had done landscapes because she did greeting card landscape, that kind of thing. But when he said, well, no, he couldn't do Scrooge over our fireplace, he said, but at one point he had done the closing, I think one of the closing pieces on that biography of him that we did a whole bunch of coverage of Carl in the last issue of Comic Art. And one of the aspects of that was we contacted, because Disney's scary, we contacted them and said, may we have permission to reprint some pages of Carl Barks' art? And they said, not
only do you not have our permission, but we don't want you to do the issue at all. Because the children of America think that Walt Disney draws the comic books, and we do not want to disappoint the children of America.
Okay. Then Walt Disney died. And we wrote again and said, can we do it now? And they said, sure. So we did it. And it was a whole bunch of things, including from correspondence that we had, Mike Berrier. There's a whole bunch of material there. But at the end, now what's he doing in retirement? And he said the graduating class of a high school that was being torn down had hired him to do a painting of the high school. And he said, right now, the money I'm getting for that commission looks as big as Scrooge's money bin to me.
Wow.
And so we said, okay, you're doing landscapes. Could we buy a landscape? And he sent us, for the cost of materials, a little landscape of a little stucco old house, an abandoned house in the middle of a field with a mailbox that birds had built a nest in. And for, as I say, cost of materials. And it hangs in the hall upstairs so that I can simultaneously in the room next to it, look through that door, and there's her landscape and his landscape there.
By now, we've all seen the paintings he's done of Uncle Scrooge and the Ducks.
Right. That was later. Yes. Yeah. So he did plain old duck paintings that weren't for a while, and then they licensed him to actually, do the characters. By that time, it was way more than paycheck to paycheck Thompsons could come up with, which is great. Yeah. He freaking made as much money. He should have made more, but he made money. So this was good.
His landscapes, when he would draw an ancient Mayan village, for example, it would draw you right in. It was the greatest establishing shots I've ever seen. And he always had an establishing shot on every page.
Yes, he did. And are we all aware that Raiders of the Lost Ark has 3 scenes from Carl Barks stories?
Yeah.
So, genius, absolute genius. Fans who know, keep an eye out. So within the last year, I was in a Half Price Books, and whoever was sorting their comics and charging for Marvel and DC and whatever, took Funny Animal comics and just bound them in a plastic bag. And there were three bags that they'd sealed with tape, so you couldn't see what was in them. All you could see was the top comic and the back of the bottom comic, and it was $5 a bag. And one of the bags, when I got it home and opened it up, had something of the Yukon. Anyway, the Porky Pig Yukon Del 4 color, which is in the condition I bought it in as a $200 item. So it's just like, yeah, okay. Yeah. You buy good stuff, and sometimes you find stuff you didn't expect. That's part of comics, guys, comics. Yeah. You never know what you're going to find.
Yep.
Or podcasts or online videos or whatever. Yeah.
Because like you got to know or have some sort of relationship with so many different people. If there are people that you really didn't, I don't know how to say, I wanted to say like that you really like the people, even though you did not get into their art style.
Absolutely.
Or their kinds of stories.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My gosh, these are people who are telling stories with pictures and words. And as Harvey P. Carr said, there is no limit to how good the words can be and no limit to how good the pictures can be. Do I give a hoot and hell about sports? No, I do not. When the Packers win a game and I know my son is happy, it's like, yeah, Packers. I don't care, but I care because someone who I care about cares, or thoughtful people care, et cetera, et cetera. You bet.
Well,
the Packers did a documentary on my son.
Wisconsin, you would have to root for the Packers because it's the law.
Well, I will point out that as I just hastily mentioned, the Packers actually did a series called Packers Life, and they did little half-hour documentaries on Packers fans, and one of them was my son Steven, who was at NPR. So they came to NPR and they photographed him at NPR and they interviewed him about being a Packers fan. I am not kidding. Yeah. And one of his points was, he said, well, I grew up knowing about fandom and fans, but I wanted my own. So comics, science fiction, whatever, film, sure. I wanted my own, and here were the Packers. And I could care about them and cheer them on and so forth. And heck, yes, he does. So I'm just saying. Stockholder Packers, what do they sell those for? $1.50, whatever. I'm just
but it's hard to get things though. It's hard to get seats and stuff.
Yes. You want to be in at the beginning of something cool, which is one of the things that folks look for, is what does nobody know about that I know about, and it's my secret. And
and then when you see somebody touch on the subject, you think, oh, should I tell them about my favorite thing? But I don't want it to get too popular.
Yeah.
Well, and in pop culture, though, okay, with me, it was not only comics, but it was science fiction and fantasy and radio and television. Well, not television. It was not television because we didn't have a televisual machine in the 1950s. Don and I were finally able to buy. No, somebody gave us a TV in 1963.
Wow.
I think 1963. Because we couldn't afford it. Come on. And then there was the longest newspaper strike in history, was the Cleveland Press. And once it was over, somebody there went out and bought a new TV to celebrate and gave us their old TV. So that was how we got a television.
And you could pull in 3 channels, right, with the rabbit ear antenna?
Sure. Yeah. And I believe also PBS. I think so. I'm just trying to remember. We were still in Oberlin because I was still going to college. And so
I'm just interested, kind of the behind the scenes of how the the Comic Buyer's Guide worked, as far as your the deadlines, how you guys put things together.
Well, she said, okay, taking you back in time. This is the previous publication. So this is a newspaper that came in multiple sections and was hard to keep together. And then it had a cover that was tucked behind everything. So it was
interesting.
This. I just brought this out for visual aids for this entire discussion.
Yeah.
So that's the way it came from Alan Light. And then it would come in your mailbox, and with a Ken Pierce ad on the back and whatever.
White.
And this.
Nice.
Robert Bell, let's all buy comic bags.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to find out when bags for comics, when were the first food preservation plastic bags sold at grocery stores. Somebody needs to research that because somebody figured out, oh, we can put the comics in there and the covers will stop getting ripped off every time we put them together and then they rub on each other.
Right.
Especially the Ziplocs.
No. I think Glad bags. I think Glad bags were the first. And they would come in a long roll and you'd pull them apart.
Oh, that's right.
But I don't know when. I really want that year. Yeah. But then Bell and others came along and did actual bags. Doing a column in that. It was called Beautiful Balloons. And so the first one was a half page, and we typed it and laid it out. I did the art. And it was, we called it Beautiful Balloons. And it was, so the heading was a balloon and it said up, up and away. And then in the lower corner is the arm reaching, Superman's arm reaching up and going, hey, that's my beautiful balloon. We don't even get the gag anymore. There was a song. I'm just saying. Okay, yes. Yeah. So that was the start of our column for Alan Light. And it was as many pages as we wanted to do. So we didn't have to do more than half a page, but we did. And basically we did it for free because we did it for free. It doesn't have to be good if you do it for free. Yeah. And it went on, and eventually he insisted on paying us. And that was nice. And then Chet Krause was a hobbyist in rural Wisconsin. The town was Iola, that nobody's ever heard of, except now there's a big car show there. And in fact, my understanding is this year it's the 50th anniversary of that car show. And basically, he did that at a Lions Club thing to get attraction to Iola, whatever, Lions Club. But he was a coin collector. And there was no, basically, it was classified ads for coin collectors. And that started him laying out pages on his kitchen table, as Alan Light presumably did with Buyer's Guide years before. Anyway, 1952, Numismatic News began by Chet. And then as he was looking at wait a minute, there's other things to collect. And then he also collected cars, because there's a small investment. Yeah. And he went on, actually, he also collected, just footnote that some people don't know, is Chet also collected fire engines, because that's cheap.
Wow.
And then, yes, to top it off, he was in World War II, and he decided that one of the things he wanted to collect was one of every kind of vehicle that there had been in his unit in World War II in Europe.
Wow.
So he not only had a tank, he also had a tank recovery vehicle. So he built huge storage units on the edge of town in which housed all of that. And so he could do magazines on different things. And he went on from that to then do trading cards. So Sports Collector's Digest. And he also did one for a little less collector-oriented True West and Old West magazines, which was mostly that era. And eventually it wasn't for collectors and didn't, etc. But Alan was there, and obviously Chet was checking collector publications and said, hey, what about this Buyer's Guide thing? And bought it from Alan and said, I want to turn it into a newspaper. Who do you know who would be able to edit it like a newspaper with magazine and newspaper experience? So Don had been 23 years at the Cleveland Press, which had just gone under. Thank you very much. Right. And I had been writing and editing magazines for, as I say, Fantasy Empire and so forth for Hal Schuster. So we were both qualified. Footnote again, there was a rule at the company, for no frickin' reason I can figure out, that said that if you couldn't marry in the company, so the head of typesetting had to quit because she married the assistant chairman, whatever. Anyway, and so Chet said, well, we've had this rule, but you both are qualified and whatever. And how on earth will you handle it? And we go, well, the way we've always worked together, it'll be fine. Peachy, no problem. So we broke the rule. Then the rule went away, and there were a lot of weddings the next year. You'll be amazed to hear. So we did both magazines that Alan Light had done. So there was not only Comics Buyer's Guide, but there was, well, it was the Buyer's Guide for Comic Fandom. And we said it needs to push what it is up front. So it needs to be Comics Buyer's Guide. And then the other one was Film Collector's World. And we said people are collecting more than film. And that's a field, by the way, in which the people who collect film, the people who collect 8mm film don't like the people who collect 16mm film, who have contempt for the 35mm film, who don't understand the non-anamorphic films, who only collect posters, who only, etc. It's like, oh my God. But anyway, so we changed the name to Movie Collector's World, and we edited that until eventually in a trade. So he got Goldmine for record collectors, and Movie Collector's World was sold to Brian Buchanan in Detroit for him. So blah, blah. So pop culture, movies, comics.
Are you reading comics today?
Not nearly as much as I should. I am really out of the loop. And I am kept in the loop to an extent. I still buy some stuff every free comic book day. I get all the free comic books, and then I actually drive to Westfield in Madison, and just did, by the way. And it was my first year, because I was very careful during pandemic. I didn't go. Last year it was open, and I just arranged with them. I said, can I buy something expensive and you'll still send me the free comic books? And they said, sure, because they're wonderful. And then this year I drove down and I said, so I picked some stuff, and they had pulled some stuff that they thought I would like and so forth. Have I opened any of them? Not yet, but I will when I'm not so busy. But I do the newsletter for the Gemstone folks. And let me point out that one of the things I do is keep track of anniversaries. So the manuscript that I am only now waiting to do a final copy edit on, once I'm done with this, that's the next thing I have to do, is the final editing to send in so it can go out Friday, is I want to call attention that 35 years ago in June, Mike, heads up, 35 years ago in June, what?
I remember visiting you in Iola. There was kind of a little mini Comic-Con. Is that it?
June 1987. Nope.
It might be about you, Mike.
DC's Flash begins a new series as Wally West turns 20. Happy Birthday, Wally is by Mike Barron, Jackson Geis, and Larry Mosted.
You know, I'm working with Jackson now on a new story.
See, and I'm out of the loop.
Hey.
Everybody needs to go out and check it out. I'm just saying. Good writing. Good writing. Just saying. And the other thing that's sad about doing that is there's a whole freaking bunch of deaths. And so I cry a bunch when I do that. And I was like, what the hell?
That happens when you get old.
It does. And it also horribly happens. And I worked out the wording with my daughter, who's a fantastic. She was in professional PR for years, one of the largest PR companies in the world. And I had I was running something by her, and I said, so-and-so committed suicide. And she said, don't say that. She said, died a suicide. And that gives cause of death, but it's not a committed. This person is, this person is dead, and it's horrible, and we miss them. And I cry a lot. In fact, one of the things that I want to go back and explore one of the things I did years ago, the guy who illustrated Dickens' Pickwick Papers apparently came up with the idea for Pickwick Papers, came up with the art for it, and then Dickens took the credit and obviously did the writing, and the guy didn't have any work. And it was like the successful failure. And there's a lot of successful failures in the field of comics and in many fields. Yeah. But so sometimes I cry when I do it, just saying.
Well, we were lucky to have known so many of the greats.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes. And to the point at which we go, when did I meet this person? Oh, yes. I mean, I just went to Neil Gaiman, just had a thing in Madison.
I saw that.
Did you go?
No, I'm in Colorado now.
Oh, what the hell?
Yeah, we both escaped from Wisconsin. So
what?
Well, I didn't escape. I had a good reason for moving out here.
All right. Now, if it was a good reason.
But I do miss Wisconsin. I get back there probably once a year. I'm coming back again this year.
Excellent. Well, I was going to say, I was singing the Berryman song the other day because it was 90 something. And they have a song about, have you heard about the heat? the line, you've heard about our snow, no doubt, but have you heard about the heat? What is it? Boiling the beer, spoiling the meat. Yeah. Hey, have you heard about the heat? Wow. And so anyway, yeah. So Neil Gaiman was in town a week ago, and I went down for that, and it was the first audience I've sat in a long time, and I'm still masking. Come on.
Yeah.
Nobody's masking, nobody's distancing. That's why video is very cool. I'm just saying, you can breathe all you want. Doesn't make a difference.
Yep.
But I'm going to Comic-Con this year with son and daughter and 2 grandkids and whatever, and we'll see.
Are you going to check out the museum there too now? The Comic-Con
Yeah,
museum?
I was one of the quote founding members. In fact, but when I say founding members, I made a donation. Give me a break.
Right.
But yes, I'm very curious to see it. It's wonderful. And again, you come to town and it's just like flags all over town. It's like Comic-Con, and I'm going to be really curious to see which things are still open. For example, what hotels are still there.
Right.
Horton Plaza changed a long time ago. And by the way, Mike, ex-Wisconsin residents, are you aware that the Horton of Horton Plaza in San Diego, which isn't there anymore, but used to be one of my favorite malls in the world, is the same Horton as Horton in Hortonville, which is a little town near Appleton. The guy was a real estate developer. So he developed a little town in Wisconsin, and then he went to San Diego, as one does, and founded the chunk of San
Is he
Diego.
the guy that heard a Who?
Yeah, I was going to say.
Nice. No, I'm sure he heard no Who's.
But that begs the question. Did you know Dr.
Raises the question. Excuse me. Raises the question.
Raises the question.
Thank you. Begs the question is a technical term. Do we know this? I'm just saying it's one of my rants. Go ahead.
Did you know Dr. Seuss?
No.
Okay.
No. And enjoyed many of the Quick Henry the Flit ads, etc. And he's got some anniversary of Dr. Seuss is coming up. Because I know that I just did a thing on Quick Henry the Flit, was the ad campaign that he was known for back in the day. And then, of course, he did a whole bunch of comedic political cartoons and so forth. So people only know him for the kids' books, but he did political cartoons, lots of serious stuff. Funny stuff, making that clear.
Right.
And that is part of the fun of delving into the history. And you go, wait, I never saw that. And then you go, every once in a while, there'll be one and you go, I have no idea what you're talking about. So, someday there'll be a thing on dial phones and no living person will have ever used a dial phone.
Yeah.
Just took the last payphones out of New York, they said.
I saw that.
Wow.
Just saying, times change. We all have our little cell phones. They're all there telling us stuff and spying
it's funny how entertainment changes with the times and how they find new uses for cell phones all the time now. Like I'm watching Bosch, this detective series.
Oh yeah.
Whenever he enters a crime scene, he takes out his phone and he takes all these pictures and it says before search.
Absolutely. Yep. And just as a by the way, so my 2 grandkids, one of them wants to work as a voice artist and is doing animation for games. And now he just turned he's graduating from high school in the next month. Nice. And my granddaughter, who is also graduating next month, just painted a full mural in a stairwell at her high school. Again, sort of a manga type character. So she's very influenced by manga. He's very influenced by the art in video games. Right. And you don't know what that's going to turn out to be once they start producing stuff in earnest in the next decade. And how is anybody going to make money versus I'm going to create this and then you're going to steal it from me and make all the money from it while I sit over here and wash dishes for less than minimum wage. Yeah. Well, did you see The Simpsons on Sunday?
No.
Well, it was season 33, the last episode of season 33, with voice artistry, including Hugh Jackman for Cry Eye and Ronald Reich, the economist Reich, doing a piece on economy and weirdly, subversively, whatever. Yes. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Just saying. And Dan Weber is one of the I don't know, producer, director, showrunner, whatever there. And so you talk about people, my celebrity adjacentness is that he's the guy who worked on The Onion and invited my son to contribute to The Onion, where my son pumped up the AV Club into a major blah, blah, which eventually turned into a job at National Public Radio for him. So just saying, pop culture happy hour, guys. Just saying.
Yeah. She's got to plug any other
pop
family
culture
members?
Happy hour. You need it. I'm just saying. Which was and it was created because Stephen and Linda were sitting on the couch watching something and saying, hey, we could talk about this on air, or maybe a podcast or whatever. And they booked a studio with a couple of guys so that they had comics, TV, music, and I think Broadway kind of, anyway, theater. Oh. And booked a studio and did one. And then he said they did the second one. And well, because that's the other thing. We work for NPR, so we have $40,000 mics. So, Andy Hardy, why don't we get together and do a show? And they said they got notes from the head of NPR on the second podcast and kind of looked at each other and said, I guess we have a show. Then that's later on, he went to co-create the Tiny Desk concerts. So I'm just saying, you do what your interests are. His interests were music and sports.
I have seen a Tiny Desk concert because I'm a Tower of Power freak, and they have a Tiny Desk concert.
Yes. Yeah. And that was Stephen's idea because they went to South by Southwest, which is the big music festival, as opposed to the Comics Festival in San Diego. This was the Austin South by Southwest. Yeah. And there was one that he wanted the music editor at NPR to hear. I hope I've got his title right. But anyway, Bob Boylan at NPR. And Stephen said, I want you to hear this singer. She's really great. And they went in, and it was a bar. And she had a very soft voice, and she had an acoustic guitar. And it was a bar. Wow. And they couldn't hear her. And they kind of shrugged and turned to walk out. And then Stephen said to Bob, we've got $40,000 mics at NPR. And he went back in and said to her, next time you're in Washington, D.C., would you like to come to NPR and perform? And she said, yep. And there it was. Bob Boylan was in a group called the Tiny Desk Unit. And so Tiny Desk Concerts came out of it, and it's at Bob's desk, which is about 10 feet, no, maybe 15 feet away from my son's desk. So you can sit at my son's desk and watch a Tiny Desk concert at NPR.
Other stuff, but there's a group in Florida called the Kitchen Killers or something like that, and they perform in people's kitchens, and they just do all these live things and everything. And it's which I must sound crazy with all of the metal.
I understand they play everything, including the kitchen sink.
Yeah, exactly.
There's instruments all over the world, and you just have to find the one that you're going to whack on.
Yep.
So, I mean, let's face it. I'm sitting here with a thing, and I go, there we go. That's what it's all about.
Do you like people to get a hold of you or follow you online?
Oh, well, I have a website, which I hope will become active again. The guy who ran it for me still technically runs it for me, but he wanted to put a new skin on it some years ago. I am using a term. I have no idea what I'm talking about. Yeah. And again, you talk about celebrity adjacent. So he's a New York Times bestselling author who was also the editor of Comics Retailer over at Krause Publications. And so John Jackson Miller set it up, and I hope to get it going again. Wow. And that will eventually be eventually be possible. At the moment, I'm at Thompson Maggie on Twitter is probably the best way. So @ Thompson Maggie, all lowercase, ThompsonMaggie. And I will point out that I was talking to somebody from England years ago. They had called me and they said, how do you spell your name? Are you a wet Thompson? And I said, a what? He said, yeah, P in the middle. So it's something to keep in mind if you're trying to figure out how to spell things. Just saying.
Well, thank you for being on. We had a blast.
This was fun.
Yeah.
It's love the background. Did Captain Marvel Jr. do what? I don't know.
Influence Elvis.
Oh, and yes, he did, of course. You know that.
Yeah.
You know that.
Yep.
Okay. Mike, do you know that?
Oh, Mike. Tell before you go. Tell us how he influenced.
The sideburns. The Captain Marvel Jr. had those long sideburns, and as Elvis was growing up, he liked the sideburns and he kept them. So that's Captain Marvel Jr. Probably the one drawn by Macro Boy, although I don't know. You at one point when we were talking about how I got into comics and so forth, I don't want you to think that Funny Animals was all I read. I mean, goodness gracious. I mean, Black Cat, drawn by Leah Last, taught me how to do judo. If somebody gave me a hard time, you just elbow. Just saying.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah, just saying. Yeah, EC fan mad. What can you do?
Yeah.
All right. You guys take care. Thank you so much.
Maggie.
This has been delightful.
Yeah. Thank you.